There we go. It's all set. How do I start this? How are we all doing? Having a good time? Much as we can at the moment? Never done one of these before, so I'm not quite sure how to open it. Guess we just jump right in. I'm a bit of a film fan. I like keeping up to date with different actors, creatives, directors, filmmakers in the industry who I like and respect a lot, often more than myself. And nobody quite hits the bullseye for me like my Mexican film pappy, Guillermo del Toro, joining us through Zoom today. Must be frozen. The man just has a distinctive style, unlike most other filmmakers working today, both in the sense that most other filmmakers don't have a style that is as recognisably unique to them, and in the sense that you know exactly what his style is. You watch a Del Toro film, you know you're watching a Del Toro film. And aside from them all fitting within his favourite genres, styles and themes, like gothic horror, political drama, humanity, and of course, monsters, the way he frames his characters, both visually and narratively, the lingering feelings of horrors, not just of the monsters or the people, or the houses. Should the plural of house be heis? You just know what you're getting into with Del Toro, and it's a mix of what personally appeals to me and his execution of the material that has made him my favourite filmmaker for nearly a decade now. Blimey. So I'm going to take the time to go through his filmography and give my opinion on all of the films that he's directed, from my least favourite to my favourite. Part of me feels like I should save him for a later video if I were to ever do more of these, because he means so much to me and I'll maybe develop my style a bit by then. But honestly, when's the best time to do anything? Also, he had a film come out relatively recently, so now's a good time to do it. So I'm recording this as I finish up the edit. This video may have lost some relevancy given that Pinocchio came out 2 calendar months ago, but just the other day got announced that Del Toro's doing a Frankenstein movie, which is very cool, with Oscar Isaac and Andrew Garfield. So yeah, there's some relevancy. Anyway, let's move on to the big stuff now, shall we? You all came for the films of Guillermo del Toro. Same. And I should preface this rundown by saying I do at minimum like all of his films. Not that there's anything wrong with disliking a film by a director you love, I just happen to think all of his directorial stuff is pretty good. So bear that in mind if you see one ranked a little lower than where you'd put it, or even a little higher than where you'd put it. This is relevant to all kinds of ranking lists, but you're going to disagree. And that's okay. So let's dive into it, and what better way to kick off this whole thing than with a mildly hot take. Number 12! A mildly hot take such as my least favourite film by Guillermo del Toro being Blade 2. Yeah man, here's the thing. I wasn't that big a fan of the original Blade to begin with. I mean, the action was solidly choreographed and Wesley Snipes and Chris Christopherson were great, made for a very watchable duo. My problem with it is it's the kind of film I feel would benefit from having a bit of a wink and a nudge about it. It's a very silly movie, both on paper and on screen, but everyone involved just treats it with this dramatic air that's almost comical, Snipes especially, and when it ended I was just kinda like, oh, alright then. Blade 2 is, I don't want to say a significant improvement, but it is an improvement. The villains of the film, the Reapers, are a lot more memorable than the guy Stephen Dorff played in the first movie, and very scarily designed. I'm not familiar with the Blade comics at all, so I don't know how accurate they are to them, or if they even existed in them. But in the movie, you can totally see the Del Toro influence. And what works most is, as is Del Toro's way, it leans more into the lore of the fantastical and the monstrous, rather than just the cool factor of Blade 1. But also, it kinda sorta has that wink I was looking for. Like, it still treats itself relatively seriously, but it's still kinda silly, and it kinda knows it's silly. There's this feeling that, like, everyone involved is having a good time and rolling with the punches. It doesn't hit much harder than a 3-star film for me, just because it's still relatively weak in the character department. I don't remember anyone's names, and none of them really left an impression on me, though it was cool to see Danny John Jules show up for a bit. He needs to be in more things. I also really like Del Toro's style here. Like, where the first film emphasises cool, this film emphasises oh shit, and I think it's better for it. So yeah, it's far from a bad film. Like I said, about 3 stars for me, closer to a 3.5 than a 2.5. But in the great list of this man's work, it does sit as my least favourite. Sorry. Just sit comfortably with the fact that this is not the worst review of this film. Number 11. Over the years, I'd just heard this one being constantly ripped, even by Del Toro himself, though that was more to do with his time on the film rather than the film itself. And yeah, not hard to imagine why. And yeah, Mimic isn't great, but it's a decent enough version of the kind of thing it's trying to be. Just this nasty little creature feature against the grungy, grimy backdrop of New York. It works. The main problem is its editing, which isn't that surprising given Del Toro's restrictions imposed by the film's producer, Weinstein. No, his brother Bob. Apparently during production, Weinstein hated the footage that he was seeing so much that he came to set to try and educate Del Toro on how to make a movie, which I mean, you can imagine how fulfilled that guy's feeling.
Guillermo del Toro.
But as for Mimic itself, it's a suitably ghoulish little creature feature that has a bunch of the Del Toro trimmings, like freaky monsters and dark and claustrophobic locations, but I don't feel it has the personal touch that all of his other films do, including Blade 2. This is the theatrical cut I'm talking about. I haven't seen the director's cut yet, which Del Toro says he's much happier with, so it could be that that personal touch is clear in that version, but for the sake of 6 minutes of footage and the circumstances he was working under, I wouldn't be surprised if not. For me, this is easily the least necessary viewing of his filmography, but I mean, it's engaging and fun. You won't feel like you've wasted your time. Number 10. And already we're a few rungs up the ladder, even this low down the list. Next up is Cronos, Del Toro's debut, and the first in his Spanish language trilogy, though more on that later. Cronos itself is a suitably spooky little venture into the vampire genre, though even saying that feels like saying too much. I think it's far from his best film, obviously, but I think of all of his films, it's one of the best ones to go in knowing as little as possible. What I will say though, Del Toro, the absolute giga chad, getting to work with his favourite actor Federico Lupe on his first film. What a get. Solid time for someone starting out there. Lupe plays Jesus Gree, and he's a great central character to pin all of this on, partly by virtue of him being an older character, which isn't something we see all that often. The way the film shows how he changes throughout the story, and the him we become used to seeing clashes with the him we understood him to be at the start of the film, it's quietly and consistently very effective. That and the excellent chemistry he has with Tamara Shanth, who plays his granddaughter Aurora, makes both characters very easy to connect with. This was also Del Toro's first time working with Ron Perlman, and the fact that their friendship has lasted so long is A, very wholesome, and B, not that surprising given how good he is in this film. He takes this role very seriously. He seems to be really relishing this character, trying to find out who Angel is and how he ticks. The fact that he's also the only member of the cast and crew whose first language isn't Spanish would be a pretty intimidating position for someone in his shoes, but he rolls with it, and it worked out then, and it worked out to this day. I think most of its problems, which aren't that many, can be attributed to first featureitis. The budget is just too small to accommodate for some of Del Toro's grander ideas, especially towards the end, and the narrative oomph in the script is a little flaky in its execution. But as debuts go, this is really fucking solid, and on its own terms, an effectively spooky little treat that would be great for a Halloween screening. Number 9. And here we are, already in the meat of the stuff. This was all potato dauphinoise and braised carrots up until now. Now we're onto some fine-ass chicken. Anyway, Hellboy. Pretty bloody good, even during an era where superhero movies were very hit and miss. It even measures up well by today's standards in this current overcaped climate. It is a bit of a weird film, due in part to the subject matter. This really is the perfect franchise for Del Toro to dig into. But also in terms of story structure for a superhero movie, or at least what general audiences expect from story structure in a superhero movie. But that's also why it's great. If the studio heads got everything they wanted back in the day, I bet Liz would have ended up with Myers, Hellboy himself would have had about half the screen time, and there'd certainly be less tentacle monsters and Nazis. But it digs its heels firmly in all of that stuff. Well, not firmly. Mr. McWhoaryu is still hocking about for most of the runtime. But everything around him is just a note-perfect Hellboy adaptation. And of course, what else needs to be said about Ron Perlman? The dude is just so good in this role. As far as the great performances in comic book movies go, he stands proudly alongside Downey and Ledger and Jackman, but just below Simmons. That is some restrictive makeup he's wearing, so he's not as visually emotive as some of the other characters, but Perlman, having worked with makeup in the past, he doesn't try to fight it. He makes room for it in his performance, so when he's staring someone down, or snapping his head towards a threat, or just saying, huh? He still feels like a guy, like he's this monster-slaying demon who walks amongst us. But he also just feels like a bloke you'd meet down the pub. It's tons of fun, one of the most visually dynamic and inspiring blockbusters in recent memory, and amazingly, really funny. I know we're oversaturated with jokes and quips in our giant summer movies nowadays. Thanks, Marvel. But things like the Hellboy movies are a great blend because the jokes are actually clever and funny. We'll talk more about the sequel later on, but on its own terms, Hellboy is a great time. A visual feast. Although, I am very curious about the timeline where Jeremy Renner played him. That'd be something, right? Number 8. It is a shame that Crimson Peak disappointed at the box office, though it's not that hard to see why. Guillermo del Toro wanted to make a gothic love story, Universal wanted a horror, and no amount of love and passion was going to stop them from marketing it as a spooky jaunt in the run-up to Halloween. I'm not going to make it a thing where I assume other people's reasons for not liking something. I know that's annoying, but I do think that's part of the reason why this film gets overlooked a lot of the time. People go in expecting a horror, when it's not that. I think all the actors in it are really good, and they really deliver the emotional goods when it comes to betrayal, love, obsession, and ass. Tom Hiddleston has a real charm. He's very watchable, but I felt this with a few of his projects, and I don't mean any disrespect to the guy, the dude's a brilliant actor, but I don't think he has leading man energy. He's a great support, and he can really sink his teeth into a role with a lot of depth, but between this, Kong Skull Island and The Loki Show, I feel like he's better when he's not carrying the whole thing. But he is good in this film, and Mia Wasikowska and Jessica Chastain, capital G great. To use an early 2010s meme format, this is the most Del Toro film to ever Del Toro. Even when there are no ghosts kicking about, you see characters just walking around this house and everything around it, and you just see all these little details, and you're like, yep, that's the guy. He has such a knack for production design. No one does attention to detail like him. This Gothic mansion has so many little details that catch your eye, and every time you spot a new one, it's satisfying in a way only Guillermo knows how. I know at one point Del Toro considered this to be one of his top 4 favourite movies that he's made, and I totally get why. I do think it is a bit long considering the story. I think the mystery surrounding the house gets floated around a bit longer than necessary. And not to knock Charlie Hunnam, but I do think most of his stuff is kinda superfluous. But taking this for its narrative, its atmosphere, its performances, its production design, its ass, you're not gonna walk away feeling nothing. This is a film with passion pouring out of its seams.
Number 7.
It's both exciting and surprising that it took Del Toro 10 years to get to a film with just no supernatural elements in it whatsoever. I mean, there are certainly supernatural implications in Nightmare Alley, but there's no explicit, like, ghouls or creatures roaming around. The creatures here are the people, which, you know, that's not exactly groundbreaking for Del Toro, but at the same time, no one does it like him. The film's the story of 2 halves. We start out with our lead character, Stan Carlisle, as he approaches this carnival and becoming adjusted to the people there, meeting the crew, and Molly in particular, played by Rooney Mara. And by the time he leaves, the film becomes something completely different. It's almost like the film version of a 2-part novella in that sense, like Little Women, but it's definitely one connected narrative. Del Toro has referred to the entire film as prologue for the final shot, which is just the most amazing way of framing a 2.5-hour film. That final shot is what sticks with you most of all though, not just because it's the final thing you see, but because how it affects you given everything you've seen preceding it. And part of that is to do with Bradley Cooper's performance, which, to be real, I've never had that much time for Cooper in the past. Nothing against the guy, I just find him so naturally annoying. But nothing against him. But I don't know, yeah, just pretty much all of Rocket Raccoon's appearances post Guardians 2 have made me want to die. And I'll admit, maybe it's my bias because this is a Del Toro film and I love him, but I do think he's genuinely really good here. He just really nails the vibe of this two-faced, self-serving scumbag, and, you know, maybe it makes sense now why I think he's good for the role. And the rest of the cast rules. Kate Blanchett and Rooney Mara, I mean, what else needs to be said about them after everything they've done? What else needs to be said about them after Carol? They're so charismatic in this, you can hardly take your eyes off them. Blanchett in particular as Dr. Lilith Ritter is such a captivating, dangerous character. I felt like a lot of the time I was watching a Black Widow. And I was also a Black Widow. Scary stuff, man, but she kills it here. You really relish the scope of the world and the journey you see Stan go through in Nightmare Alley while you're watching it, while you're in it. It's often fairly subdued, but when it gets its claws out, boy howdy is it full on. And it's one of the things Del Toro does so well. He's not afraid to take a tale like this to a bleak conclusion. It's not pleasant, but it's often deserved, and you can't really imagine a more suitable ending to any of the characters after this whole experience they've been through. Nightmare Alley bombed at the box office, which is a real shame, but at the same time, not surprising. But I do wish more people got the chance to see this one on the big screen. It's an all-encompassing, nasty, gritty treat.
Number 6.
Exciting stuff here. Del Toro has only ever made one sequel to one of his films, and it joins the ranks of the few that are better than the first. Yes, indeed, Hellboy 2: The Golden Army is a fun, romping fantasy adventure with high-stakes action, visually resplendent worlds, perilous threats, a friendship between 2 men with zero toxic masculinity, discussions on mortality, and an introspective look into the worldview of our main characters. Summer blockbuster, really? But as a film in Del Toro's library and a superhero popcorn film, this makes a lot of choices that I really admire, and plenty more that I just straight up love. As a sequel, the world gets a lot more fleshed out here. This one isn't as inspired by the comics as the first film, but that allows for full-on Guillermo visual style. I mean, look at this! So many cool character designs, and some of the film's most memorable moments are against a really stylish, well-thought-out backdrop. But hell, one of the best scenes in the movie is against a boring grey city landscape, but it rules because look at this big green motherfucker! There are bits of it that are outdated in that mid-2000s superhero kind of way, but it also gives you a lot that you just don't get in a superhero film nowadays. Old man moment coming in, but they just don't make him like this anymore. As for Hellboy himself, he's one of my favourite superhero characters anyway, but anytime I rewatch these 2 films, the question then becomes, is he my favourite? Ron Perlman's performance as Big Red is just so damn good, and like I mentioned, same bracket. He just nails the character. He's so watchable anytime he's on screen. Of all the franchises that are chugging along, forcing out new installments that aren't needed or planned, or just lying dormant, this Hellboy is one of the ones most in need of a new chapter. This would have been one of the best trilogies ever if it got a third part from Del Toro. And even though the series got rebooted, same thing happened to Ghostbusters, and that got a direct sequel to the originals. Perlman's not getting any younger. If they started shooting part 3 tomorrow, he'd be like 74, 75 by the time it came out. I know it's not going to happen. In my heart of hearts, I know. But that window is closing, and he's not getting any younger. If it's going to happen, now's the time. Though I do get the impression that Del Toro himself is not as enthused about it, which, you know, fair enough, but it kind of stinks. But we got to look at these two films just on their own merits, and on their own merits, they're great. The Golden Army is one of the best superhero sequels out there because, on top of being tons of fun, it demands you engage with its characters. And those characters are so deeply rooted in their own history, journey, and personal moments. This is such a character-rich film. If you're looking to expand your intake of fantasy, this is a must-watch. Number 5! Big stuff here. We're on to the top 5 now, and it's a delight to be able to include in the top 5 A, a film that is one of his biggest passion projects to date, and B, his most recent work, and the main reason I'm doing this silly thing. Yes, indeed, we have 2022's 17th Pinocchio retelling, and I don't think many people are going to throw hands if I say it's comfortably the best one. Firstly, the decision to use stop motion. Galaxy brain idea. I mean, the aesthetic lends itself so well to the story of Pinocchio, and the actual quality, the craft. It's some of the best I've ever seen. Like, even with the greatest 3D animation, like the most highly rendered, beautiful, captivating 3D animation, you still know it's animation. But these real tactile models give the whole thing a very lived quality. Like, as you're watching it, you forget it's not live action. Like, it's just, this is a real world with real people. And that's not to say how stop motion as an art, and these character designs are just so through and through Del Toro, like so suited to his sensibilities. Which makes sense, given that's where he wanted to start, so it's nice to see that he finally got it off the ground, and also just completely and totally nailed it. And let's not forget the cast, because, dear God, all of these actors are very well cast in their respective roles, so I wouldn't have pegged Cate Blanchett as a monkey. Cinema. Newcomer Gregory Mann, in particular, is excellent as Pinocchio. Pinocchio is a character that can very easily be meant to be portrayed as precocious, but come out as irritating instead. But this character you just kind of fall for right away. The childlike wonder he exudes, even as he faces hardship after hardship. And you look at the lessons he learns along his many adventures, and at that final choice he makes at the end of the film, and you compare him to the beginning. It's just excellent character growth, done so well. I will say though, as a lover of musicals, I don't think it needed to be one, and may have been better for it if it wasn't. Because it does that thing I noticed some original musicals do, where they just kind of stop being one. And the songs themselves are 50-50 on whether they're memorable and relevant or not. Though Ciao Papa is a beautiful, gorgeous track, and surely a frontrunner for the Oscar. This is a wonderful film, and it's nice to see Del Toro, a maestro of horror and gore and politics, approach a family film. Because even though it's PG, it doesn't feel watered down, it still carries his soul through and through. If you have kids who are interested in film, this is an excellent watch for them. And for just about anyone else. Time for a tea break, I think. Assam. Number 4. Generally with the filmographies of great directors, you have those who start out really strong and then gradually decline, and you have those who have a steadily strong career with a bunch of great hits throughout. Del Toro falls in the latter category, but it's still mad to me that only 2 films under his belt, and in his 30s, man made an absolute masterpiece with Devil's Backbone. It's one of his most celebrated and acclaimed films, but I also get the impression one of his lesser seen. I mean, you compare it to some of these and it's, you know, possible it gets a bit overlooked. And I'll admit, I was one of those people. This was the last film of his I hadn't seen before Pinocchio came out. And it is totally worth watching, trust me. One of the things I find myself doing with most of Del Toro's films is applying like 100 different adjectives to them. Because they're all true. How many films by one filmmaker have that kind of depth? Case in point, The Devil's Backbone is a beautiful, tragic, haunting, captivating, intimate, powerful tale. A rich political allegory, jaw-droppingly well directed and written. Maybe a little underbaked in the first 15 minutes, but the character development and storytelling here is as good as it gets. And when that ending rolls around, you're left pretty speechless and teary-eyed. The effects are incredible, especially given the time and not having Hollywood backing. One thing that's prevalent in most of Del Toro's films is his use of child actors, like to a degree not often found in live-action adult films. It happens with a lot of his films, it happens here. Most of the main characters aren't even teenagers, and they're all great. He knows exactly what kind of character is best suited to the telling of the story, and he just, damn, he knows how to cast them. And there's something about watching children go through these dark, adult-oriented situations, just situations they shouldn't be a part of, that just It just adds to the terror. And it makes the characters all that more captivating, their development and growth all the more rich as you watch them go through these horrible things. And of course, the political drive behind it. The Spanish Civil War is just... it's an excellent backdrop and used so well for the telling of this story. And it's amazing just watching the fantasy elements blend with the real world peril. It just leaves you in awe of what comes out of this man's head. Man's just a master of the craft. This is one of the greats, by one of the greats. Do check out Devil's Backbone. It's brilliant. Number 3. Here's one of the things I love most about cinema and the discussions around it. That there may be a general consensus on what are considered good films, what are considered bad films, and how certain films affect us in what they do. We can all have different opinions on something because we as human beings connect to different stories in different ways. Case in point, most rankings of Del Toro's filmography have Pacific Rim relatively low, generally describing it as just a flashy bit of fun with not much substance. Which, yeah, it's an understandable take. But boy howdy do I disagree. Pacific Rim fucking rules, and it rules because of how it can be viewed on different levels. Yes, it's a giant robot monster kaiju smash-up fuckfest, but Del Toro treats all of his films with the same level of respect. He puts as much thought into this as he does something like Devil's Backbone. But let's talk about some of those levels, because on the flashy fun level, it rules. Because, oh my god, he hit that guy with a ship. Did you see that? But putting that aside, it's one of the most visually impressive, beautifully shot, dynamically constructed blockbusters I was gonna say in years, but honestly probably ever? The focus on character growth, how we see Raleigh and Mako separately throughout the whole film as their own individuals, but by the end they are just completely intertwined with each other. The concept of the drift is genius. This one bit of lore and world building gives the film a stake in character depth and growth that so many other summer blockbusters could really do with. It forces our characters to be connected, not in the way where the screenwriter just tells you they are, tells you that they're best friends or lovers, even when their on-screen portrayal clearly doesn't show that. Rather, the context of the world forces them together. They learn over the course of this story not only to work together, but to live in each other. They learn every possible thing they can about one another. That scene where Mako gets caught in the drift and Raleigh sees into her past in that kaiju attack. It's scary shit to see in the cinema, but also just such a powerfully important moment to the character, such a defining moment. We understand a great deal more about her and about Idris Elba's character, whose name is, hang on a minute, let's see here, Stacker Pentecost. Fucking A, man. These moments of character, on top of the themes here at play, themes of global unity, anti-war, acceptance, empathy, on an intimate level and a worldwide scale. It's poetic. This giant world-ending kaiju robot movie is poetic. It's a war movie with several enormously entertaining sequences, and it never once celebrates or idolizes war. And yet the kaiju movie is romanticized here in its purest form. You get that, on top of a character-driven saga, all in the space of 131 minutes. It's breathtaking. It's beautiful stuff. But also, oh my god, he hit that guy with a ship! Did you see that? I love Pacific Rim. All the time in the world for it. This one was okay. Number 2. I'm just so proud of him. Yeah, the Oscars aren't the gold standard ironclad seal of approval we all want them to be, but it still made my week to see Del Toro walk away with not only Best Director, which he was expected to at the time, but also Best Picture for a monster fucker movie? Look, The Shape of Water is a bit off the wall as far as what general audiences can expect, but also, wow. Just fucking wow, man. When you think of movies that are made for Oscars, you think of a handful of different types. You think of the broody character-driven pieces like Taxi Driver, movies like Green Book or The King's Speech that educate you on real-life troubling events, but make you want to walk away with a cozy sort of feeling. But when you think of what the Oscars are meant to stand for, the best filmmaking in all of Hollywood, it should be all around the world, but it's just Hollywood, let's be real. It's for things like The Shape of Water that come to mind. Del Toro's films are all excellent at establishing where and when they're set, and there's not a moment here where you suddenly lurch back into it and realise it's set in the 1960s. It just is the 1960s. And that kind of time frame being alien to us in the present is useful for when the amphibian man takes centre stage and sees an alien world himself. I've just realised, we've gotten this far into the list and I haven't talked about Doug Jones once yet. Man's incredible as an actor, versatile as a performer, and an absolute trooper for bringing so many intricate, vivid characters to life while plastered in 5 inches of latex. And this amphibian man, despite not talking, is one of the most expressive characters in the movie. Hell, in any recent movie. Jones's performance and the technical wizardry that lets this creature breathe is just... it's just film magic. It's like that feeling I imagine most people had at the time when they first watched Creature of the Black Lagoon, or the OG King Kong. This creature, this expression of love, both the love Del Toro has for the genre, and the love between Eliza and the amphibian man. A love that's gentle, malleable, and can break through any barrier. Like water. His words, not mine. I'm not that breathtakingly perfect and intelligent. It's strange because as much as I adore this film, it being in my all-time top 20, I don't have as much to say about it as some of his others, because I think it needs more to be experienced. Gun to my head, gun to my balls, I can talk about this film for hours on end, but I think it's better to watch it, to take it in, bathe in it, let it flow over you. Water metaphor. But yes, The Shape of Water, masterpiece. One of those films that just leaves you immobile as the credits roll. Number 1! Shocking nobody, yeah, of course it's Pan's Labyrinth, are you kidding me? I know some people rate Shape and Backbone a bit higher, which, I mean, who's gonna give you a hard time about that? They're both great. But Pan's Labyrinth just strikes a chord, hits a spot, scratches an itch, pulls a heartstring, on a level that very few others can. And obviously, let's just get this one out of the way. There's no way to talk about this film without bringing up Sergei Lopez as Captain Vidal. Boy, I really panicked on the pronunciation there. You get villains who you're supposed to empathise with, who are meant to be seen as tragic heroes, good people who have lost their way. And then you get Vidal, who is just straight up and down pure fucking evil. Like, to a degree that it could have been comical, but it just goes so far that it loops back around to just being utterly terrifying. And that's everything around him, from Lopez's performance to the lighting and the framing of him. He just seems real, like you're watching a portrayal of a real-life monster, which, you know, Del Toro, he is the real-life monster. But this character stays with you, he's chilling and scary, and an incredible representation of all that is wrong with the world in this time period in the movie and in real history, as well as today. I could go on forever about the story, the themes, the performances, and a part of me wants to say, so I will, but we gotta talk about the visual effects. The makeup and costumes and set designs, bloody fucking wow. Doug Jones is incredible here because, I mean, look at that. There's no man under there. That's just a ghoulish goat man they found in the woods. And on top of all that, man speaking entirely in Spanish, which is not his voice in the end, but he still spoke it. What a mountainous task he had on his hands, and he just went above and beyond and just nailed it. He also portrays the Pale Man, which is probably the most iconic image of this film, and it's just an incredible portrayal of the themes of this movie and the terror it brings across. The Pale Man is terrifying, the Faun is really compelling, and even when they're not on screen, you're still thinking about them. They're still like, it's like they're just standing behind you. There's a real presence there. And on the topic of the rest of the cast, they all bring their A game here. Just excellent, excellent actors portraying very real characters that you just find so easy to connect with. I've waxed lyrical about Sergei Lopez. Let's talk about Ivana Baquero. She was only 11 when they filmed this, and she portrays such tenderness, such quiet ferocity, such power. She needs to have a career just full of movies that everybody sees. Like, if this movie came out today, she'd be in a Marvel movie tomorrow. Point is, she's an amazing actress, and this is one of the all-time great performances. And Maribel Verdú and Alex Angello are both excellent, both portraying sympathetic revolutionaries. Both tragic characters that deserve better than the situation they're in. When you think of horror movies, first thing that comes to your head is probably a jump-scare-ridden thing down a dark hallway, or something like Paranormal Activity, or a big shark. But the horror in Pan's Labyrinth goes a little bit deeper. It twists the scare knife just a little bit further, because boy is this film terrifying, both in the fantastical nature as well as the real, and it can flip-flop which is the scarier. And honestly, both are probably as scary as they are because of the other. It's a very double-sided coin, reflective mirror sort of thing. It's a tough watch. It's grim, it's gritty, it's grisly, and it's overwhelmingly, heart-throbbingly beautiful. The ending is so satisfying, seeing through the entire story and every character's arc, but it also just leaves you weeping. There's not a whole lot out there like Pan's Labyrinth, and I encourage everyone to give it a try. You're in for something different. Something very special. And that's it! We did it! We made it through to the end! I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very, very much for watching. I truly can't say if I'm going to do any more like this, I just know that I wanted to do this one. So here we are. But if you enjoyed it, let me know, and hell, what's your favourite Guillermo del Toro film? I would love to hear. Thanks again. All the best.